a ministerial program at Multnomah Bible School, and he became a church pastor that year. And then he did that until around 5 years ago when he retired. So that's just a little bit about me before Milwaukee PD. I started at Milwaukee PD in 1995. Just a 24-year-old guy that wanted to find a good city to do police work in. And I've been here ever since. Super lucky to have landed in Milwaukee, and the city and the community have both been great to me. And overall, it's been a fantastic experience. Briefly, some of the positions I've held obviously started off as a police officer. I did a 5-year assignment in our general assignment detectives. And you work a lot of violent crimes and serious crimes, work close with the DA's office. I worked on a federal drug and gang team that was not tied to Milwaukee. It was regional and had a lot of federal partners. I did that for 3 years. I became a sergeant and then went immediately to night shift and spent about 4 years on night shift as a line supervisor. And that's what our sergeants are, is they're the first line supervisor that runs a shift. And then here a few years ago, I promoted to captain. Some of the management schools that we typically send our people to, one of them is the Southern Police Institute. So that 3 months at the University of Louisville is about the extent of my exposure to the South, unlike John. And it was an interesting experience just because I haven't spent much time. Really, the vast majority of my time has been here in the Pacific Northwest. So very different life. Obviously, I've been a white male my entire life. And now at this point, I've been a white male police officer for just exactly half of my life. So it's an interesting perspective to look at. Obviously, when I view things and analyze things, I can't help but look at it from the perspective of a white male and pretty much from the perspective of a police officer. I would like to think I do a good job and get better, I think, every day at looking at things from someone else's perspective. And like John said, that involves a lot of listening. And sometimes listening can be harder work than you realize. But I do try to do a lot of listening and actually hearing people versus just waiting my turn to talk. So that's a little bit about how I got here. I've been in the chief's position, like I said, for about 2 years. And especially over the course of the last year, we've spent a lot of time looking at the issues that the country is grappling with related to racism, bias, and equity in policing, and trying to kind of process all that is going on both here locally and across the country. And I know we've all lived this past year together, and I think it's been a challenging year for everyone in different ways and to different extents. So congratulations, you made it through this past year. And I'm glad that you're here with us today as part of this team that we can work together with as we chart the path forward. So we have spent a lot of time analyzing sort of what racial equity in policing is and trying to take an objective look at our business, how we run it, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and take an honest look at where we have areas we can improve. And certainly when we do that, we look not only at our own mistakes, but we look at everyone else's mistakes, whether that's local or across the country. And if it's a mistake we have never made, then our question is, how did that happen? And how do we prevent that from happening here? So there certainly has been a lot of analysis of our police services in general, how we apply them, and how well they serve our community and our department members. But we are here because we truly want people to feel safe and supported and respected. And we really do strive to provide excellent police services. So thank you everyone for being here with us tonight to talk about some of these issues.
Thanks so much, Luke. Chief. Something you said just now about your perspective, half your life, your entire life as a white male, and half your life as a police officer. I think that's important. No one can see all perspectives. No one can see all angles, right? And that's just not possible. And so I think one of the things that excites me about the work we're doing in Milwaukee is the fact that we can have conversations like this with members of our community from all different backgrounds, all different perspectives, and have open forums where we can talk about those different viewpoints and hold each other accountable. Because you know, in my role as equity program manager, yes, I'm going to do everything I can to see as many possible angles, but I will never see everything. But by having spaces where we can talk about what maybe we're missing, viewpoints we haven't considered, experiences we haven't lived, we can be better and build a process by which we are continually improving ourselves as a city. Again, like I said, there's no, you know, magic wand to solve all of this, to be our best selves. You know, with here's the formula, you do it. It's about having a conversation and having a process built into everything we do. We're going to talk a bit about policing in just a second, and that's a part of where this has begun. When I came on board, it was like jumping onto a moving train because the Milwaukee Police Department was already really moving quickly to take a look at the department with the leadership of Chief Strait and the city manager Ann Ober, the council's direction to make this a priority. And that was really refreshing. To see an organization that was already really taking a good hard look and inviting other voices in. So before I actually applied for this position, there were listening sessions. We'll talk about those a bit later, but community listening sessions where members of the city's BIPOC community, and for those of you who may be unfamiliar, I think everyone here probably is, but BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color community, 3 listening sessions held. One of those, I believe, fully in Spanish, or at least primarily in Spanish, to get a sense of how interactions with law enforcement were affecting those communities and to gain feedback. And a lot of what we'll talk about tonight comes out of those conversations. The value in having people share their lived experiences with you really cannot be overstated. It is one thing for us to do analysis. We can look at the data, and data is important. It's important. It's vital because data tells a real story. It's hard facts, but data doesn't tell you the entire story. And so when we're able to pair that data with the experiences of people who live in our community, who work in our community, who pass through our community, we get a broader picture of what we're doing and where we are and where we need to go. So the value in having those sessions before I came on board is enormous. I have gone back to those to look at some of the commentary from the community. I know that that's the beginning, not the end of a process. We will have many more conversations with our community, informally like this and more formally like those. But having a continuing dialogue will be enormously important and impactful for us continuing to improve how we operate and how we interact with all of you. The sessions that happened this fall were intended to really begin a conversation and as we go into the spring and summer, I'm hoping that we'll be able to find ways to have some more virtual sessions. Hopefully later on in the year, maybe we can actually get people together in a room if conditions allow for that. But I want to encourage all of you, just this is sort of my early pitch to all of you, because you're here and clearly you're here because this matters to you, that you will stay engaged with us. So I'm going to make my first pitch for Engage Milwaukee. Each of you who received the email from me inviting you with the link to this meeting, there was a link in that email for the Engage Milwaukee site. I will mention that multiple times tonight because that is a place where we will be putting informal questions. It's a place where you can submit your own ideas and thoughts and questions and continue a dialogue. So you'll hear me talk about that site a lot tonight. And the reason for that is we really want that to be a place where people can come and share their thoughts and have meaningful conversations just for a couple of hours. And we can then sort of go back and forth, sharing ideas, sharing experiences, talking about what's going right, and talking about what we can do better. So I encourage you all, if you haven't, to register on that page. It's also where we will post information about upcoming events. So I really encourage you to be a part of that conversation and to continue to engage with us. It will be of enormous value to me and my work, and I think to all of us as a city, as we continue to talk about issues around equity. Also, I wanted to just raise something early on. We're going to talk a lot about race and the BIPOC community. And the reason for that is that, well, one, we have 2020 happened, right? And so it's undeniable that that is the conversation that we are all leading with right now. The city council and their priorities prioritize discussions around race and dealing with racial equity as the first step. That is beneficial in two ways. One, it is the time to have this conversation. There has never been a time more vital than to have these conversations. Second, if we can address the issues of systematic racism, of inequities that have been baked in across 400 years of history, if we can start to address those issues, we will also, in that process, start to address a lot of the other inequities that exist. That is not to say that we are not focusing on other areas of inequity. So we're going to talk a bit about police policies and our BIPOC group that's been looking at those. We are also reaching out to some of our LGBTQIA organizations and asking for them to take a look at our policies as well, because we want their feedback as well. So my work is not just around race. The work I will be doing will be looking at inequities wherever they exist, however they exist. Just because we are having a lot of conversations about race does not mean that that's the only work we are doing. And I want to make sure that's clear up front. That said, our focus right now has been and will continue to be issues of racial equity. But that is part of a broader picture of looking at equity and inequity across our community and across what we do as a city. Luke, do you want to talk a bit about how we apply equity lens to our work?
Yeah, and this process, and I don't pretend to be an expert at any of this, nor do I pretend to be a particularly good public speaker. So humor me and bear with us here a little bit. The process of applying an equity lens, and we should mention also that this entire process is in support of Council's goal of equity, inclusion, and justice, which is to hear directly from our BIPOC community members. To create a community which is safe and welcoming for all. So that's kind of one of the foundational actions that the city has taken this past year along these lines. Most of you probably have heard the term equity lens, and some of you probably know more about that concept than I do. But for me, the first thing I did after I heard it and wanted to know more about it was started looking up different definitions and reading about it a little bit. And I found a definition, and you can find obviously a few different varieties of definitions for it. But the definition that I identified the most with was a process for analyzing the impact of the design and implementation of policies and services on underserved or marginalized individuals or groups to identify and potentially eliminate barriers. I would imagine a lot of the definitions are similar, but that one definitely, and maybe partially because of the business I'm in and how it functions, that definition really rang true the most with me. And then also defining marginalized groups. as those that experience unequal representation because of unequal power relationships. And in my business, one way that we talk about that is in terms of if there are groups that haven't been present at the table during any of these conversations, whether it's for my career, 25 years, or the past 125 years, they've had unequal representation, and therefore their opinions and their ideas about these policies and the way we delivered services have not really been fused into these systems in the way that they should be. So for us, if we want to apply an equity lens to an issue, it involves certainly first just myself trying to put myself in someone else's shoes and imagine how our services impact different people, maybe differently than they would impact me. They can then involve reaching out to someone with different experience or a different background than me. If we have those people on staff, if I have someone in my department with drastically different background or experience, then I can reach out to people with different backgrounds than I have and ask them their opinions. And if I don't have that resource there, then another way for us to do that is to reach out to the community or to other agencies around us to get additional ideas and thoughts infused into our organization. So that's just one aspect of what we're doing. And we do that more often now with specific policies. So we would take any, whether it's a policy related to use of force or a policy related to traffic stops, and we would slow down and take a time out to try to evaluate honestly, how does this affect different people, which could be completely separate from my own personal experience. And that's going to involve maybe putting the brakes on and setting up some meetings, whether those are one-on-one or with groups, to say, hey, can you talk to me? I have my own experiences around this, but I've been a white male my whole life and a police officer for 25 years of it. So I need to hear conversations different than the ones that I ordinarily would hear in the past 10 or 15 years. Because those ordinary conversations would involve police officers and maybe short conversations with people that we came in contact with, or occasionally conversations with someone that filed a complaint. But the one big thing I've noticed immediately was that when you schedule some time with someone to talk about an issue, about a policy and how it impacts them and some of their past experiences, it's an entirely different conversation than just receiving a complaint where someone's frustrated and they want their voice to be heard, and then they generally want to move on, and then we process that complaint through our normal processes. So it's been a learning and growing year for us, and I do believe we have spent a lot more time listening and just trying to process what we learned from other people's experiences. That's part of the reason it's so helpful to have John on staff now. It's hard to, in some ways you feel like you're running a team and you're just missing one of the critical positions on the team. I think we have an incredible team, but I do believe the team is stronger now that John is a part of it, and he's helping support Milwaukee and our community and our agency. So we could talk a lot about inequity lens and some of the different, involved a variety of different policies over the last 6 months. Use of force, complaint processes, customer service in general, and traffic stops are a few of the areas that we've kind of focused on over the past 6 months.
Well, thank you so much, Luke. And Chief, I really appreciate your kind words and the commitment I've seen. It has been really a joy jumping into a team that that is committed to this work. I don't have to chase anyone down to say, hey, what are you working on? I mean, I get lots of calls and emails and lots of Teams meetings lately where it's just, hey, we're looking at this. What do you think? And I appreciate the fact that I've been pulled in so fully into this work. The idea here is that we integrate our equity lens into everything we do. Every action we take as a city government has some impact somewhere. And by taking a look at what we're doing and making sure that as part of the decision-making process, we're considering who hasn't been heard, who's been left behind, who could be harmed by this. That just that process really is the outcome. I would love to say, hey, we're going to solve racism in a year. That's not a thing, right? And so, but what we can do is build a set of processes, build a culture, and I would say build on a culture, because I think the culture already exists here, where there's mindfulness, there's empathy, there's a real sense of purpose around ensuring that the work just and equitable. So it's great to be a part of a team that values that, and it's the reason why I'm here. So you mentioned policy review, and Chief and I have, along with City Manager Ann Ober and our HR Director, have been since the last couple of weeks sitting in some very meaningful and powerful meetings with some members of our BIPOC community who are taking on the work of reviewing some proposed changes to our city policies, our police policies specifically, and really doing a deep dive and looking at the policies in ways that we just don't have the capacity to do, because they're bringing their own experiences to the table. They're positive, negative, everything in between, both with the Milwaukee Police Department and with other departments. And what's been amazing about these meetings is that the sense of joint commitment to this, the understanding that we had a member of the group who last night talked about the fact that her experience with Milwaukee Police Department during the summer, and with the chief specifically during the summer, how she saw in the department, and particularly in the chief, a commitment to being respectful and being understanding of what was happening in that moment. It was a difficult moment across the country. It was a difficult moment, I know, here in this region. And a different department, a different chief, different officers that could have gone in a very different way. And so to have that support and that understanding coming from the officers who who represent the city and who protect the city was of real value. And it was really powerful moment to hear a member of that group talk about that. But this isn't happening in a bubble. These conversations are happening in the sense of a broader framework of what's been happening nationwide. And so part of the discussion has been how to make the best possible policies as a starting point. Nothing, policy is not an endpoint, it's a starting point. But it's the foundational document that says this is what we value. This is our bare minimum. This is how we operate. The rest comes from, of course, building the culture, having the right people in place. But we really can't have that conversation without making sure that our policies are at a minimum not harming people, that we have not written policies that create harm to members of our community. So we are going through a series of meetings to discuss these policies, to review changes that have been proposed to them that will ultimately those recommendations will be taken forward to the City Council. So there's been a process there, and it's our first shot at it. we'll get better at it, and we'll keep coming back to it and looking at different ways to involve members of our community in reviewing our policies. This is a small focused group, and who put together a lot of time. It's a lot of hours of work. We will have broader community conversations around policing and other operations of the city. But it has been incredibly valuable to have a group of people who are committed to putting in the time to really do the deep dive and to take this home and think about it and dig through their own experiences and help us be better and build better policies. So just wanted to just mention that. A couple questions has popped up, and I think we'll go back to a lot of these questions later at the end, but one I wanted to just quickly address from Gregory. All policies, land, municipal code, and others are just police. We'll talk about this a bit more. Yes, we will be eventually looking at all city policies. Right now, our focus has been police. But I have been meeting with many of the city departments, and as I build out my plan, my work plan for the next while, I will be working with many city agencies, some that are already in process, others that are looking forward to getting work done on updating their policies. But this will be a continual review. I mean, this is iterative. We can't just sort of come through with one big brush and say, okay, we fixed our policies. And many of our policies are actually, in my view, as I've started to take a look at policies, are in mostly good shape. But some of them will need to be revised. Some of them we just need to have a conversation around. How can we do this better? And so I think the idea of being able to revisit and have ongoing conversations about these policies will be helpful. What that looks like, I'm not sure just yet. We've talked about having a committee of community members that represents the various aspects of our community who can take a look at that. I don't know what the best answer is. I know sometimes it will be focused to groups that may be specifically impacted by a policy. There'll probably be a mixture of things, but we won't just be looking at policing. The work that I do will be around many different aspects of city operations, but we're starting with policing. Chief, as you know, coming out of the listening sessions, there was a lot of questions I know that were put forward, and maybe you can talk a little bit about just what type of questions you were receiving and the direction that sort of led you coming out of those listening sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. We've received, obviously, we get emails with questions, much like the ones you're putting in chat here today. Those are fairly common. We'll receive phone calls with questions. And then as John's explained, we did the 3 listening sessions with approximately maybe 15 people per session. And in that, we, city staff, primarily listened and then took notes and combed through those notes afterwards. And there were a lot of questions in there. And that's the one thing that we've picked up on immediately is just the need for more dialogue and conversation about some specific aspects of police work, what the policies are, why the policies are that way, and open conversations about if that makes sense and why. But we've noticed some repeated questions, whether it's through email, through the listening sessions, or through phone calls. And that kind of led us to the idea of creating a page specific for those types of questions and specifically for equity and policing. So the city worked to develop a page for equity and policing. And on that page, it is, although I think it was having a little bit of a tune-up today, and it's brand new. So we intend to continue to add to it and develop it further over the course of this year. But our idea was to put some of the most frequently asked either data or questions on that page, so that if people are looking for or not emailing us or calling us and they go to a web page, they may find the right spot where a lot of those questions are answered in advance. But we will direct you to that page today. and you can take a look at it, and we'd love to have some feedback from folks. But on it, you'll see some data. For example, our stops data, you may have heard references to that. I know many of you go to different meetings. STOPS was a House bill that was passed here about 2 years ago, which stands for the Statistical Transparency of Policing. And the purpose of that legislation was for the state to create a mechanism where they would track all optional contacts that were stops, where a person was not free to leave by the police. But it's specifically optional or discretionary contacts where it was the officer's choice. And it does not track mandatory stops in the same way. So a summary of that stops data is available on our equity and policing page. And then there's also a link to the state's main page, which is administered through the Criminal Justice Commission. So there is a lot of data there. The people that run and administer that program are analytical experts. And they have some long documents that explain the different scientific processes they use to analyze that data. But the purpose of it is to look for disparities in policing. And if you follow the news, you may have heard once or twice over the last year where an agency was the focus of attention as a result of the Criminal Justice Commission stops data. The state was broken down into 3 tiers based on agency size, and we were a tier 2 agency. So we were in the second wave of agencies that were invited to comply. And the city of Milwaukee did comply voluntarily before the law went into effect. Once they were able to take agencies, they said, essentially, you don't have to comply for 8 months or so, but if you want to start now, you can. And we were one of the first agencies that immediately began complying with the law at that time. But we're far enough in now where we do have a full, over a full year, which gives them some decent information to work with. Obviously, for analysts like that, the more data or the more information, the better. But that's one example of information you'll find on that page. You'll also see a link there for our police policies. Lexipol is an agency that we work with to provide foundational policies, and then we refine those policies later. But there's a link there for all of our police policies. And we are, as John mentioned, currently doing some fairly intensive review of 17 of those policies. And then there's also some information there that relates to police accountability, how we manage those issues, complaints and processes, as well as, and you folks may be familiar with 8 Can't Wait, the initiative 8 Can't Wait, which focused on 8 specific police policies. So those are a few of the things that we've worked on over the past 6 months, and a few of the things that you'll find on that page now. And we intend to continue adding updates or additional information as it becomes clear what additional information folks really want.
Thanks so much, Chief. And thank you, Kelly, for putting that link there into the chat. Again, if you have not visited that page, I encourage you to do so. And there's a lot of information there to look through, and we'd love your feedback. By the way, at any point, if you have feedback that you'd like to provide, you can feel free to email me, Chief Strait, City Manager Ann Ober. We'd love to hear from you. And so I'll make sure we put our information in the chat before the end, but please feel free to contact us. In fact, I encourage you to. Because we won't get to everything tonight, as Kelly said, but I would be happy to have conversations with you. And if there's something that you think that talk about more, we can definitely have that conversation and see how we can maybe even build another event like this around that if it's a big topic. A lot of questions coming in. So Kelly, do we want to jump into questions?
Yeah, actually, I was afraid nobody was going to use the chat. Now they're all pouring in. So per my promise, though, I'm gonna take the ones we got by email first, and then when we get to chat, Ray, I noticed you have one in the chat. I'm gonna move you to the bottom of the chat list just so we can kind of reach people who haven't had their question asked yet. But Ray has the first question. And I'm shocked that it's about transportation because I work with him on transportation issues quite often. He wants to discuss whether Milwaukee is open to exploring whether traffic enforcement could happen without unarmed police officers or by other staff. The city of Berkeley recently passed a measure to have their transportation department, instead of police, take over traffic enforcement. So he is just asking, and I believe this is a Chief Strait question. Have we thought about that? Have we thought about changing who does traffic enforcement here?
I have not had a chance to read the article about Berkeley, but we have received a variety of kind of sort of innovative questions like, is there a different way to do this? In some cases, they're drastically different, right? So we're entertaining a lot of different ideas. I would want to read that Berkeley article. There is some inherent danger in traffic stops, and ensuring the safety of everyone is our primary concern. To answer that question, I do want to briefly touch on our own some use of force information related to traffic stops, because that's one of the things we want to repeatedly do is folks hear and see some of the national information on the news, but I do think it's important to also reevaluate, hey, what does that look like here? In the city of Milwaukee, during 2019, we had about 54 use of force incidents that we classified as use of force. About a third of those instances where we only threatened to use force but didn't use force. And then probably another third, they would be very minor use of force where no one was injured. And then there's a chunk where someone got sort of a scraped elbow or minor scrapes. So to put that into perspective, that means we're having something that's classified as a use incident a little around or a little over once a week. Now, as far as how that relates to traffic stops, we had about 8 use of force instances that were related to traffic stops. And then we took a deeper dive into those traffic stops to see what was going on there. Only one of those use of force instances involved a person of color. So during 2019, we had 8 use of force instances on traffic stops, only one of which involved a person of color. And every one of those 8 instances had some kind of a criminal foundation, whether it involved a stolen car or warrants or other criminal charges. So I was generally encouraged by the information that I found when I took a look. Obviously, the question is fair. How safe am I when I'm driving around, particularly in the city of Milwaukee, and I'm stopped by the police? So I do think that's important information to have. We want people to feel safe, and we want them to know that it's our goal to treat people with respect and to always manage things at the lowest level possible. In those 54 use of force instances we had were over the course of 12 months, in which we had 20,000 contacts with the public, and we made between 700 and 800 arrests. So our staff, that data, I hope, leads people to believe that we generally do a very good job of de-escalating things and resolving things safely. But as far as circling back to the question of would we ever consider doing that aspect of our job without guns, there are some aspects of traffic enforcement that don't involve police officers, and we will continue to reevaluate those options and how they would apply to and impact the city of Milwaukee probably every year, and with safety for everyone being the primary goal, and traffic safety, achieving safety on the roads.
Kelly, may I just jump in really quickly
Sure.
before you move into the next question? Just, Chief, would you mind just really briefly talking a little bit about de-escalation, because I don't think we've talked about that very much, and I think that's important since you mentioned that. I just want to get your perspectives on de-escalation and how that applies to the Milwaukee Police Department.
Sure. Um, it's our focus with obviously a wide variety of challenging situations and circumstances and people. As we know, drugs are not at all uncommon for us to come in contact with people who have drugs or are under the influence of drugs. Mental health is an increasing factor every year, and then those things can combine. And when people are calling the police, obviously something has already gone wrong. So whether that's some kind of a disturbance or other crime that has occurred or a suspicious person, there's usually a combination of different stressors and factors going on there. For us to be effective at our job, our staff has to get really good at de-escalating things. Otherwise, those numbers would look drastically different. If we're making over 700 arrests a year, and we have right around 50 use of force, of which less than half of those resulted in any injury, and a third of them only involved threatened use of force. That is because our staff is working really hard to de-escalate things. So de-escalation can involve a few different factors. Some of those could be we don't want to rush into a situation too quickly. So we get better at maybe getting 90% of the way there quick and then slowing way down. And we might stage a block away from the problem and wait until we have 2 or 3 officers there and talk about what our plan is, and make sure that we have the tools and resources that we need. It can be a lot more dangerous for one person to arrive alone and to go directly into that call by themselves. That can unintentionally escalate things because the officer's options are much different and much more limited than if they have a second or even a third person there. So that's time and distance are critical factors with de-escalation. And then obviously verbal de-escalation is just absolutely critical. And it's a learned skill that we have to retrain consistently. And we did recently do additional training on de-escalation. Talk through de-escalation very regularly in debriefing calls, whether it's our own call or something that we find on the internet or on the news. We can go through that and debrief that in shifts and talk through it, what went right and where there were opportunities for it to go better or worse, and what things seemed to be working and what things didn't work. And I know you folks watch many of the same things that come across the news, but we debrief our own de-escalation success and failures with our own calls at every opportunity that we have, because it's a great training and learning opportunity. There's a lot more to de-escalation than that, but that's a quick summary of some facts about it.
Thanks so much, Chief.
Okay, written question number 2 comes from Greg Hemer. I see Greg on there, so I know he's in the meeting. And so what he has asked, he says, the Milwaukee Historical Society, it has been striving to be inclusive to all people. We've been holding events, doing proclamations, and working with Oregon Black pioneers. We would love to ask the audience what Milwaukee Historical Society can do to make sure we represent what people would like to see from us and be representative of our community. Maybe we could do a joint meeting with Art Mob and City of Milwaukee Events Coordinator. So Greg, unfortunately I have everybody muted, but you, anyone on this call can put any ideas you have in the chat, but I would actually like to hear maybe, John, if you wouldn't mind taking this one, to talk through ways that we could partner with the Milwaukee Historical Society. Oh, hi Greg, I see you now.
Hi, Greg. Absolutely. So part of the work I'm doing, and I'm 6 weeks, I guess, or 7 weeks now in, frantically trying to race around and meet everyone, which again, in the COVID world is not terribly easy. But I would love to have some conversations about how we can partner. One of the things we're looking at as a city, and I'm looking at and building my plan of work going forward, is finding ways that we can facilitate broader community conversations. There are the things that we can do internally, our focus, how we work with our own staff, how we treat each other, how we hire, how we recruit, things like that. Our internal policies, our internal culture. That's one aspect of the work we're doing. Another aspect is our external work. So how we interact with the community. So much of what the Milwaukee Police Department is doing is around that, right? Of course, our public contacts. The third aspect of my work, which is kind of unusual for a government role, at least for the ones I've had, is trying to facilitate fully external conversations and partnerships. So that's part of what I'm looking at, is ways that we can more broadly be a catalyst for equity and mindfulness and empathy in our community. So I think that, I'm familiar with work that, or I'm becoming familiar, I should say, with the work that the Historical Society has been doing. Still learning a lot because there's a lot you're doing, and would love to meet and have a long conversation about that. But I've actually had a conversation just a few days ago with our coordinator, Brenna, and we were talking about just this very point. How can we make sure that we have events that are reflective of the many different cultural experiences that exist within our community? There's often a tendency to sort of just do the same things each year because, well, we've always done these things, and that's great. There's value in that. But how can we sort of broaden our focus and open up to other things? So I would love to hear community conversations, thoughts in this chat. I will put this question up on our Engage Milwaukee page as well, because I would love to hear from, I think we have a couple hundred people now registered there. I know well over 100, and growing quickly, because I think this is a great question to leave up there for a bit and see and build some dialogue around that. So I'll be in touch with you, Greg, but I hope that we can actually have a conversation with the community that goes on for a bit about this, and maybe figure out, who's coming to events and why, and who's not coming to events and why, and figuring out maybe what we're missing. Opportunities for whether either city sponsored or city supported events. So that's a great question. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And I just want to recognize that you've done a lot on this issue, and a lot of the forums that we've had have been really valuable and instigated in large part by the Historical Society. So really great partnership. We want to keep doing it, thinking of new ways. Okay, I'm going to jump to Mary's question. Mary, and I see Mary and up in the right hand corner. Oh, do you want me to unmute you? Oh, hold on, let me find you. I may not be able to. All right, I'm gonna read your question, Mary, that's in the chat. That's okay. And then I'm going to let Luke start answering it because it's his.
Am I the Mary you're talking about?
Yeah, you're the Mary I'm talking about.
I'm sorry. It's really my husband, Gene, who has the question, and I'm trying to type another question at the same time. So go ahead and talk to him.
It's okay. I'm going to talk to Gene. Hi, Gene. So the question is, if I got it right, is how will Milwaukee Police enforce the new parameters around ballot measure 110? Which deals with drug arrests, when the governor has put a hold on funding the centers and treatment for drug offenders. So I think this is, Luke, I think it's for you. You want to give it your best shot?
Yeah. So it's not unheard of for a new law to be passed where the state will play catch up to provide additional support for that law. And I think we will see some of that here. I'm not an expert on what has been done to support the law so far, but it decriminalizes user quantities of drugs. So it results in a citation as opposed to an arrest and a trip to jail. I know the state is working to build in some of that back end support and repurposing some funding, but I don't claim to be an expert on that aspect of it because that all happens kind of completely separate from us in law enforcement. That's strictly user quantities of drugs, so the lowest quantities of drugs, manufacturing and distribution. And distribution would also be having more than a user quantity and drugs that are kind of set up for distribution. So that stuff is still criminal and still quite likely to lead to a trip to jail. In those cases, we do still often try to use jail as a form of leverage to get someone into treatment. And we work with programs like LEAD, the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, and Project Hope to try and connect people to the resources they need, as opposed to just using the criminal justice system as a hammer with no social services.
Yeah, good.
So
Thank
it will involve citing and releasing user quantities, and the state's building in all the additional support that will go with sort of that new way of managing those.
Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, I'm going to move on to Lisa Brousseau's question. So Lisa says, I'm the mother of an autistic son. I have concerns about potential police responses to his, quote, atypical behavior as he gets older. Hoping that the intellectual / developmental disability community is being involved in these diversity conversations as well. And she'd also like to encourage the city to provide an ASL or sign language interpreter for these Zoom meetings as well. So really great comment. Thank you for the suggestion. I'll take that back to my team. And then I will actually take a volunteer between Luke and John in terms of who wants to tackle this one.
Well, I'll certainly jump in at the beginning. And have you had any interactions with the Milwaukee police where they're giving services to you or your family, Lisa? Regardless, I know you might have already muted. I think our
She
staff.
said nope.
Okay. I think that one of the things there is if you call for services is just to explain that. That's not an unusual situation. And the last thing in the world we ever want to do is hurt someone. In our use of force and de-escalation policies, we talk about doing the best we can to determine if something is leading to behavior that isn't normal criminal intent. And we recognize sometimes disabilities and being under the influence of drugs or alcohol can cause people to do things that lacks criminal intent, and that we should factor that in significantly in how we respond to that, and sort of what techniques we use to try and, in your case, help your family manage that situation. So that's not an unusual call for us to help a family manage a situation involving someone with disabilities. And it's not uncommon for us to get a phone call or an email saying, the police came to my house and helped out with a family member with a disability and just did a fantastic job. Now, I have to say that because it's true, but I do recognize we're not perfect, and I definitely understand your fear and your concern. I do believe that's one benefit of living in a city this size. We have less than 40 sworn officers. We all know each other. They get to know the community they work in. And there's no hiding in an agency this size. So it's important that everyone constantly be trying to do their best. And we look for weaknesses and areas to improve. But I'm confident you would get service if you call for help with something.
And I will jump into the second half of that. So Lisa, yes, thank you. As I mentioned, looking at equity is our work is not just around race. That's where our initial focus has been, but that is certainly not the full extent of the work that I'll be doing. In fact, quite frankly, I wouldn't have accepted the position if I thought that were the case. This is a broad area of work that needs to be done, and I didn't mention it specifically earlier, but individuals with intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, and the mental health issues. There's so many aspects of our community that we have not traditionally brought into the conversation, and that is something that I will continually try to be mindful about. And so I want to make sure that that's very clear. That one of the reasons why I'm sort of building out a work plan right now is because there are just so many people I need to meet and have conversations with and invite into our conversations. So we will not always get it right. We will not always capture everyone, and that's one of the reasons why I'm hoping that all of you who are on this call tonight will continue to engage with us either through the Engage Milwaukee site or contacting me directly, because I want you to hold us and me specifically to account to make sure that we are inviting the right people to the table. That's part of what we mean when equity lens, is we're talking about making sure that we are bringing people to the table into the conversation early on, so that we are, as we look at our policies, as we look at our programs, we are making sure that we aren't leaving people behind. I noticed that you added and a couple of things to your question. So is there a registry? I don't believe there is. I could be wrong. I'm still getting familiar with the city, but I don't believe there's a registry for kids like yours. But let me look into that and look and see if not, how that looks. And if you know any, if you have thoughts about that or have information, please feel free to share with me, because I'd love to hear more about that and how that could work. I also want to make sure that we don't do anything that unintentionally creates harm. So I want to make, if we were to look at something like that, I'd want to make sure we do, that we're not inventing the wheel there. If there's something that's working somewhere else, I'd love to take a look at it, and have a conversation with our team about ways that could work. It's an interesting thought, and I don't know is the answer. And often if you stay with me long enough in these conversations, I will say that I don't know. I'm perfectly comfortable saying that I don't know, and I don't know the answer. But I'm more than happy to take a look at it and make a recommendation based on that. So thanks so much, Lisa.
Okay, the next question is from Richard, and it's actually a nice kind of segue from what you were just talking about, John. So proud that Milwaukee is moving so proactively. Are there efficiencies and practical benefits in working collegially with adjacent cities and county and state municipalities to be in alignment in both policing and broader police improvement or policy, excuse me, broader policy improvements?
Thank you for that question, because I have some awesome colleagues. Absolutely awesome colleagues, and I want to call out one of them right now. She's not on this call, but Martine Koblenz is the DEI director for Clackamas County, and I have so much respect for her and the work that she's been doing. She's been such an incredible ally to me and incredibly supportive. And I'll be blunt, she's had a rough couple of weeks. If you haven't heard, there have been some statements made, and I'm not going to go into them on here, but having to do what she's doing for a staff that is hurting and hurt and harmed, for a community that is worried and hurt and harmed, and for herself, member of a community who is raising children in a community where she's having to face that. I cannot imagine a harder place to be, doing the work that she's doing. And so she's a remarkable leader in this field, and I'm so thrilled to work with her. The answer is yes. There is definitely benefit in working together. Martina and I speak regularly, and we're working on some projects that go across city boundaries. Obviously, there's no, we don't live in a bubble, and we can't just address Milwaukee, right? Because the experience of Milwaukee, people may live here but work in Portland. They may live here and commute to Oregon City. They may work here and live as I do in Clackamas. And so how do we fit those pieces together? How can we be as seamless as possible in sharing best practices and learning from each other? That is something that's really valuable to all of us. And so that's something that we will be doing. What that looks like is still kind of in development. I have heard that, by the way, Milwaukee is the first city to hire a DEI or an equity manager in Clackamas County, but it will not, soon that will not be the only city. I understand that there are 3 other cities that are looking at hiring positions. Some have announced, some have not. But as those positions come on board, I look forward to reaching out to them, just as Martine reached out to me, so that we can continue to have these conversations and find ways to work together and to share the workload and find ways where we can partner, because we may all be working on different things, but there's areas where there's overlap, and there's areas where we could sort of, split up and say, hey, if you take this, I'll take this, and then let's meet and share ideas. So that is beneficial both in more people talking. It's also beneficial in just efficiency, both financial efficiency, obviously, because there is a financial investment whenever you're taking time to work on any project, but there's also just the time efficiency. The sooner that we can sort of start working on sharing ideas, the better, the more quickly that we can implement those ideas and bring them back to our communities, and then try to make them work in a way that fits our community specifically. So again, there's no one size fit all approach, but working together, I think we can find better solutions for all of our communities. So fantastic question. Thank you.
Okay, I think we might be at the last question, and I'm going to tell you how I arrived at that conclusion. I believe that, Lisa, I'm hoping the back and forth, your follow-up question, I think got answered while we were chatting. And Ray, I think Chief Strait dug into the use of force and talked about some of the de-escalation tactics, so we may not have quite gotten there, but I think we're close. And I feel like keeping you past an hour and 15 minutes on a Friday night is too much to ask. So with that, I'm going to give Michelle Hemer the last question of the night, and I'm going to give it to Chief Luke. Michelle would like to know how the Milwaukee Public Safety Foundation could help advance equality goals.
I appreciate the question for sure. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer that, and both Kelly and John might have some insight on that. We always welcome the help, but I would have to do some thinking and some collaboration with my SMART coworkers about exactly how you can best support and fit into that. John or Kelly, do you have ideas off the top of your head?
I guess I haven't had to answer anything. So I'll try. I mean, I think one of the really great things that you have with the Public Safety Foundation is an opportunity for 2 things. One, to do outreach to community that in a way that's friendly and kind and not in the middle of a crisis, right? So it's a way to build these relationships outside of crisis, which is really a beautiful thing. And it lets us get to know people. So I think taking a look at who we've been reaching, what types of work we've been doing, and who we haven't missed. So I know we've said equity lens a lot, but I think let's apply the equity lens to the Public Safety Foundation. Who have we been working with? And the other one is actually something that that Luke and his team do really well already, but I think we could do even more of, which is visibility. So when people don't see themselves in our work, it's hard to connect to. So how can we not only do that outreach, but provide more visible opportunities to show others that that we want you to be safe. We want you to be a part of creating a safe community here. So those are just a couple kind of general ideas, but I think we could take that view and sort of with some fresh eyes and say, okay, we do really great work. Who out there haven't we done great work with?
I completely agree.
Did I ask and answer the last question? Is there anyone else? Hold on, let's see. Let me just scan really quick. Everyone loves Bartine. She's wonderful. Ray's put some really good information in here about some regional collaboration opportunities that we can plug into.
I will give
yeah.
a clarifying answer to one question because I saw a specific question that what is exactly a use of force. Our definition for what a use of force is or includes anytime that an officer uses physical techniques or tactics, and it does not necessarily mean anyone was hurt. Consistent with the 8 Can't Wait initiative, one of the factors on the 8 Can't Wait is require comprehensive use of force reporting. And if you read deeper into that, that's the request is do comprehensive reporting on instances where force was thrown but not used. We have done that for quite some time. And we have intentionally worked to do an even better job of that starting about a year and a half or so ago. So our use of force reporting is good. The basic language policy requiring reporting even when you threaten to use force, which would mean if I say, hey, you need to turn around, put your hands behind your back, or I'm going to taser you because I don't want to fight you, and then the person complies, that's still classified as a use of force incident. It still gets documented as a use of force, and we review it and scrutinize it as a use of force, which means an entire report package goes up through the sergeant, through the captains to the chief, and we review everything that we did and the decisions we made, and we look for compliance with policy, any concerns, or any new ideas for a better way to handle those situations. So I know that's what 8 Can't Wait, the initiative requiring comprehensive reporting is all about. And I think we're kind of a leader in the area in how we handle use of force, how we report it, how our supervisors investigate it. They respond immediately to a scene and do a separate independent investigation aside from whatever police action was taking place there.
Thank you, Luke. Okay. Go enjoy your Friday. Thank you so much. You're all wonderful, lovely people. Whether you showed me your picture or you were in the box, I see you. The fact that you were willing to give up your time to talk to us tonight is just an amazing gift. So we really appreciate it, and we'll do more of this.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. I saw your message. Thank you. And I put my email in the chat, so feel free to reach out if you continue the conversation there. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good job, guys. You nailed it.
Thanks, everyone.
That's a wrap.
I'm copying the chat and I'll just save it so we don't lose any of that stuff. And
Okay.
I'm going to turn
Perfect.
off
Thank
the
you so much.
recording.
Thanks, Kelly.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Luke.